theatre.
So how did you become a playwright?
I was working in theatre as a designer. I was doing sets and props and making puppets and making 3D objects with my hands and kind of telling stories like that. I was also a closet writer, if you like. I wrote short stories for myself at home. I'd always written diaries and things, and I loved storytelling. And it's one of those things where sometimes your hobby just creeps to the fore and starts to become more important in your life. And that's what happened. I stopped designing for theatre and I started writing for theatre. But importantly, I was encouraged and given support by those around me who said, we think you can do this. So that was very important.
You've written for both theatre and television. Which do you prefer?
I always prefer the thing I'm working on at any particular time. So it's a bit like chalk and cheese. You can't really compare writing for TV to writing for theatre because they're very different and both excite me in the same way.
What was your earliest experience or memory of theatre?
I was in a school hall, a cold school hall, when Merseyside Young People's Theatre came to visit us and put a play on for us. And it was Willie Russell's Blood Brothers, which has had a huge run at the West End now for many years. But this was their first outing of this particular script. And Willie Russell was there, I think, and he was trying out this story on a bunch of kind of bored adolescents in a school hall. That's the first time I remember kind of theatre coming to me and being intrigued by the mechanics of the storytelling, how they were telling the story, because we could do a question and answer session with the actors afterwards, and that was very interesting.
Okay, so do you have a favourite playwright?
I don't have a favourite playwright. I like people who can tell stories in a very economical way, or in a very creative way, or just in a way that's surprising. I think if I had to say sort of classical plays that I like a lot of Arthur Miller stuff, the big epic stories. But what turned me on to storytelling and writing stories and theatre perhaps was reading a lot of Philip Ridley, who is a contemporary author. He writes a lot of children's books. He also writes adult fiction. He writes screenplays and he writes plays for theatre as well. They're quite dark. Their characters are fantastic, very rich. And it was his storytelling across all those genres that really got me excited about telling stories to people.
Would you say it was him, or is there any other playwrights or plays that have inspired you?
I do find his work inspiring. I find inspiration everywhere. I watch a lot of telly. I go to the cinema a lot, as well as theatre. But I think for that kind of nugget of why I do what I do now, when I was at university, I saw a sort of cabaret troupe at a local fringe venue called Blue Lips, who were a very camp, very gay sort of cabaret troupe who did a wonderful kind of bawdy review that was quite sort of political, but the most amazing spectacle I'd ever seen, because their costumes were 3D and their songs were fantastic, and I could literally smell the goose paint. It was one of those experiences that made me think, oh, this is just such a wonderful experience. I want to be involved in this.
How do you go about writing your plays then?
I tend to start with characters. If I have a commission, if I have a nugget of an idea I know I need to explore, then the characters will perhaps come to me as I'm wandering around. I do a lot of wandering, sitting, thinking. Public transport's very good for that. So I think a lot of the writing happens before I actually sit down and write anything. People often mistake typing for writing. They're not the same thing. Creating the stories and creating the characters takes a lot of apparently sort of doing nothing. And then I'll write a short story. I tend to get the story down longhand, as a story with a beginning, middle and an end.
So, what advice would you give to anyone who is thinking of writing plays or becoming a playwright?
Well, firstly, know your medium. So if you want to be a playwright, then you need to be going out there and reading plays, going to the theatre as often as you can, seeing as much as you can, getting involved in the theatre world, talking to other writers, talking to directors. Just see as much as you can. And also, I think it's really useful to be involved in some kind of writers group. It can be a formal thing where you meet, regularly and write and read the stuff that you've written, or it can be just a group of friends who regularly get together and discuss ideas. Because it can be quite isolating. I think if you're a writer, the tendency is to perhaps just kind of beaver away at it and then kind of shyly come out and say, well, I've got this and I'd really like someone else to hear it. And I think you need to start doing that. If you're writing for performance, then you need to take your kind of scripts out of the closet and get them read by friends or by a local theatre group or something. So keep contact with the real world. But essentially, a writer writes, so you've got to do that. You've got to be writing.
Thank you, Abby.
Thank you.